Since I'm a diplomat, I cannot resist to say a few words about the international situation where we are now. We will cut off this because it will not be, tomorrow it will not be true. But I just want to put the context. My main concern is transparency in state building. I think the key issue of Ukraine, as I see it from my frequent visits and study and talks with people dealing with it, is Ukraine is at the same time in a process of state building, at the same time it is in war. And these processes meddle in each other. If you're in war, you cannot put all your forces into state building. On the other hand, being in war gives you a lot of incentive to build your state quicker than in other times. Now, what's the raison d'etat? What's the purpose of the state? And this is exactly what I've said. It's, on one hand, integrity of governance. This was the motivation of the people coming to Maidans, to have a better government. And at the same time, because there is a war going on, it's integrity of territory. And so the both things are important, integrity of the government and integrity of the territory. I will speak about the key objectives, the tasks which lay ahead of Ukrainian society and government, the tools and procedures, and I will specifically focus on the Czech experience coming from illustration to a system of security clearance which helps to consolidate the security sector. Of course, I will touch the questions of access to information, Freedom of Information Act, and the questions of conflict of interest of the persons in the government. So that's the outline. Now, brief context. I have this picture because I would like to remind us about who are the actors in the current Ukrainian situation. You see Ukrainian's flag in the middle. Then you see the Normandy Minsk format. Then you see America dealing directly with Kiev and Moscow. And then you see OSCE somewhere in the air. Not clear what OSCE can do in this, but it's definitely in place. And we are trying to cooperate with OSCE mission to put some ideas, what we are talking about, into their work here. The same goes for NATO and for EU, because both NATO and EU has a mission advisors here. I'm not speaking about bilateral advisors at all. I was told there is enough advisors in Ukraine. It's not enough reformers in Ukraine. So purpose of this is to bridge between those people who are outside of the government with people who are inside of the government to help to push necessary consolidation forward. So that's the purpose. Conspicuously, you see the symbol of United Nations somewhat sidelined. But that would be another question. Now, the key factors I consider as obstacles or inhibitors for transparency in state building is that there is an ongoing information and propaganda war, and there is a what I call Soviet legacy of high secrecy and over-classification of everything. And this is a pretext, both. There is a war going on, we cannot disclose, and because of this legacy of we have to classify everything, everything is secret, as a pretext for not disclosing and restraining access to information. I think this is one of the biggest obstacles in working society, NGOs, think tanks, together with the government in consolidation. Now, what are the challenges? There's a low public confidence in state security structures. You have numerous opinion polls about that. Recently, I would like just to refer to the poll which was made by International Republican Institute, which is covering the regional support and regional assessment of corruption and other elements. It shows there is a very low confidence in state structures. Secondly, there is an arbitrary approach to running human resources. I call it hiring and firing. There is a big level of uncertainty. People do not know that whether they will be fired from the system, and people are hired in a voluntary and arbitrary way. These people need training. Those people who are already in need a kind of confidence that they will stay. The third challenge is you have this kind of mixture, and this is also a heritage of, I would say, the heritage of post-communist developments last 25 years. It's not clear division between the private particular interest and the public interest. It's meddling. If you are in politics, are you after your private interests or particular interest, or are you pursuing the public interest of the whole country? This is not clear. We know something about it from our own experience, but I think here the problem is much deeper. Now, the key challenge is, are you going to consolidate what you have, or are you going to build anew? Are you going to go Georgian way? You have the great Georgian Deputy Minister of Interior. The Georgians, rather smaller country, started some institutions from anew. Or are you going to consolidate the existing institution? That's the biggest challenge. Now, the key objectives, and now I'm trying to focus on not on all issues, but on some issues. You have to shield the state security system against infiltration of foreign interest, that's clear, infiltration of organized crime, or capture by interest groups. We are dealing with all of these issues in a different scale, but we are dealing with all of them. There is also an objective which is not to shield, but to guard loyalty of the people inside the security system. This is the most important thing, to develop a kind of sense of loyalty, that they will not betray the loyalty to state, to loyalty to foreign power, organized crime, or private interest groups. Which means a long way in cultivating integrity and positive motivation of personnel. Some of the challenges go exactly against this, cultivating integrity, and filling security gaps. So it means protecting weaknesses which could be potentially employed by any of the adversaries. Now, what are the tasks? These were the objectives. The tasks are, you have to cope with the past, definitely. There's a lot of things which have to do with the past. There's illustration law. There should be inquiries and investigations of past criminal activities. There should be an ongoing application of anti-corruption programs and procedures, not just oriented to the past, but ongoing, because the temptation of corruption is an ongoing temptation. Guarding loyalty of security community in future, thinking what will be the system in the future. And at the same time, increasing public confidence, the approach of the public towards the state institutions. What are the tools? Objectives, tasks, and tools. The tools available are transparent clearance procedures with predictable requirements. And this is the main message I would like to demonstrate on the Czech example then. These transparent procedures are not detrimental to protecting classified data and information. If you have open information, what is the procedure which provides the security clearance to people in the system? It's nothing against the protecting the data and information you really have to protect, but you have to be very open in the procedures. It should be clear what is the procedure to everyone. Another tool, which is a completely different tool, is use of open source information in tracking illegal financial flows or exposing corruption schemes. This is a big empowerment for civil society and activists. I know that a lot of Ukrainian activists have been very good. Your anti-corruption center as an NGO, very good in tracking some financial flows from the Yanukovych era. But the open source data is here to track the activities even in an ongoing basis. And it's a very, very powerful tool which helps both fight corruption, shield the integrity of the system, at the same time increase the trust of the public in the system. Final point, which I will not present today, but there is also some experience in this. Asset disclosure made compulsory as a part of declaration of conflict of interest. To put to one place publicly accessible registry of these declarations of state officials who clearly say, this is my property, and you can control if this is true or not, and if there is no, I would say, some suspected enrichment. Now, what are the weaknesses of the current system? In my view, in my humble view as an outsider, from what I've heard from people here in Ukraine, impact of lustration law and anti-corruption campaign is not systemic. It is rather a substitute for inaction by law enforcement and justice. Because some of the issues should be done by proper investigation by law enforcement and not by arbitrary application of lustration law or anti-corruption campaign. This is just a substitute. And so as long as law enforcement and justice will not be capable of doing it, you have to do it this way. But I mean, this is not the ideal and systematic way. This is one weakness. Second weakness is a lack of active, fact-based, this I underline, strategic communication by law enforcement and security agencies. Here I don't mean PR, public relation, or counter-propaganda. I mean the fact-based communication strategy. Just making information available as the situation and investigation evolves. I think this is of utmost importance, and this is one of the weaknesses. This cannot be substituted by your Ministry of Information. I mean, I'm not talking about this kind of strategic communication. I'm talking about the communication of investigators, attorneys, police, what they are doing. Now, why the Czech experience might be one of the inspiration. There are two, I think, interesting stories which we can present, and you may learn something of it. We have gone from application of our sort of lustration to future-oriented security clearance system. It took us basically 10 years. And upon our entrance into NATO, we adopted a law about National Security Agency. Here, there is a reference to the current version of the law, which is from 2005, a law on protection of classified information and security eligibility. I will speak a little bit about this law in the rest of my presentation. The second inspiration might be from the story of application of Freedom of Information Act. It's been enacted also in '99, so it took us 10 years before we've got this law. I know Ukraine has a law on free access to information. It's just a matter of application and details. But it's the whole change of mentality of the society, and especially people working in the state institution, that not everything is secret unless we tell you. But what is not classified is accessible to public. This is the revolution in access to information, because you have to find a reason why to classify some data. And then, if not, you can be, accessed by anyone from the public, and the courts will decide who's right and who's not. I think I will finally, in the end, refer to those people who have some experience from this application. I think this is a powerful tool for people outside of government who would like to push the government to be open and reform-oriented. Now, let me speak in final 5 to 7 minutes about the substance of what my message today. And this is about our clearance procedure. I think it's very, I try to make it as graphic as possible so that you will understand that it might be similar to a system you're having, but where are the differences? We have 4 levels of classification: top secret, secret, confidential, and restricted. It's a pyramid. Most information shouldn't be top secret. Most information should be open, then restricted, and it's like a pyramid. Of course, I think there must be something which reacts to notion of secret. Yeah. It's a kind of virus which says, "Oh, there's a secret." Okay. So anytime I say secret, the sound goes on. No. And there are levels of clearance. Those who have the highest level of clearance have, you can see these green arrows, have access to all information. Those who have only, confidential, they have access to confidential and restricted. That's a clear system. Now, the levels of classification and levels of clearance, there is a reverse pyramid as for the procedure complexity and the length of procedure. If you ask to have a clearance for top secret, there is, in the law, there is 9 months for the office to make inquiries into you. If you ask for confidential clearance, then in 2 months you get it, because there is no investigation, there is no supply by intelligence and security services. Yeah. As for the restricted clearance, it is left for the institutions. So it's not dealt by the central institution, National Security Authority. It's dealt by the security director of each branch of the government. So if you're working in the Ministry of Agriculture and you need a clearance for restricted, then it's up to the ministry how they decide. It's not a clearance, the central clearance. Of course, there are some rules. They cannot give the clearance to everyone, but they are very, very, low threshold. Now, the level of the classification should correspond to potential risk which exposure of such information makes to the state. So, if I go from the bottom, the restricted information is such information which, if disclosed, it will be disadvantageous to the interest of the state. Confidential exposure means symbol detriment to the interest of the state. The secret means serious detriment, and top secret is extremely serious detriment to the interest of the state, which is defined in the law. I just want to make this hierarchy clear. Now, to see the numbers, we are a country with 10 million inhabitants, so you can divide it, or you know, you can calculate it for Ukraine, which is 4 times bigger than we are. These are numbers of security clearances issued by the office in years from 2008 to 2013. From left, this is restricted, secret, top secret. Yeah? There's an interesting trend that in the beginning it was a kind of natural distribution, that most of the biggest number, 4,000 per year, was confidential. Then the yellow secret was a little bit lower, and a very small number, you know, less than 500, and you see it's decreasing top secret. There's no reason to issue too many of those. Interestingly, in recent years, there is a growing number of those who ask for secret clearance, as you see. But still, the overall numbers are in thousands. Now, here you can see, this is from last year, how many applications they were. This is the first line. You see the biggest number is for secret. And then you see the number, how many clearances were issued, how many were not issued, and how many were suspended. So in most cases, there is not many unsuccessful attempts to get the clearance. It's really small numbers where they were not issued. Suspension means, in practice, they find something is wrong there, and that's the way of doing it. You suspend it, you withdraw your application because there's no chance you get it. Yeah. So it gives you a sense, 5,000 in total of procedures. Now, the breakdown today is, as you may have seen, this is of last year. Top secret, 200. Secret, 3,500. Confidential, a little bit less. So it's a big burden. It's a growing burden for the office, because the secret clearance procedure is more demanding. Now, what are the qualifications? And now I will talk a little bit about this transparent requirements for security clearance. This is important. Everyone knows from the law that in order to get clearance, which enables you to work in the security system, you have to perform the eligibility on personal level. This is the first line, which is you have to be trustworthy, able to maintain confidential information. This is basically about your integrity and mental health. Yeah. Then all the rest is security reliability. You have to be a person which is reliable from the point of view of security risk. What kind of security risk the procedure is after? This is security agency subcontracts for the higher clearances, police, information security service, and all intelligence services. And they are, going into their archives, and for the top secret they do even some search. That's why they have 9 months to complete all the search. They go after whether the person, the applicant, has done in recent period, and this is defined. How long is the recent period? Any activities against the state interest. Whether the person was involved in suppressing human rights and liberties. That's important. It should be applicable, to anyone who's been involved. Not here. The guy who was, in Berkut. But it could be a guy who was in Foreign Legion somewhere. you know, and you have an information that this guy was actually in killing fields somewhere in Africa, and so it's not eligible to get the clearance. Yeah? This covers all the information. That's why the search is going on. And for example, if they find out that the person was abroad, of course they will ask their partners, their international partners, to provide information about the person. That's why the procedure is comprehensive. Last but not least, and that's very important, the fact of unexplained property affluence. So they go after the property of the person. They go after accounts and borrowing and all these things. That's why my main point is if you here have processes which go in parallel. One is illustration law, which mixes, you know, together all the, you know, requirements, negative requirements, and then you have the anti-corruption office, which goes after, you know, the corruption thing, property, and things like that, financial flows. My concern is that it should converge in future into a system which will be comprehensive. So that's why I think taking this example and our experience might be inspirational to those who would like to make a system which will work not in 2015 but also in 2018, 25. A few words about how you can appeal in the process. The participant has right to lodge a remonstrance, how is it called, which is appeal to the director of the NSA against a decision. It has no suspensive effect, you know. So I mean, if you're not given a clearance, it has no suspension on the decision. But they have to make a decision, and there is a commission in the security agency which goes after that. Of course, you can go to the courts as well. There might be a judicial review of that, but only in cases where this remonstrance appeal is possible. So there is a chance for a person who feels this was not just to go to review it. There is a parliamentary control body which controls the National Security Agency, as we have for intelligence services, security services, for police. This body is composed of 7 members of the Chamber of Deputies, and they go after reports about activities of NSA, clearance procedures, budget control, internal regulations. It should be said that, for example, our National Security Agency, another big responsibility is not security clearances, which they provide to physical persons, individuals, but also to companies. Any company which deals with the state secret, for example, the arms company, you know, they need a clearance as a company. They provide a clearance for the venues. So if you need a room which is for, you know, talk, not according to Chatham House, but in the secret information, you need a clearance for the room. Yeah, that's what they provide. But they are also responsible for cybersecurity, and they have the whole branch responsible for cybersecurity of the country. That's why the supervision by the parliament is very important. Of course, the problem is who is guarding the guardians? Do these people need a clearance to supervise the agency? Well, that's a problem you cannot solve ideally, because you know, this is the biggest problem. You cannot solve it anywhere in the management. Who controls the controllers? It's a general problem of management. certain disclosure is a kind of control of whether this goes well or not. It cannot be done in secret, this supervision. Now, what are the weaknesses of, how can I return? What are the weaknesses of our system? I was speaking in the beginning of the weaknesses of your practice. First of all, there can be arbitrary determination of the levels of classification. For example, when I was working at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we had always a big debate. Does, for example, the embassy in Kiev needs a clarification, the clearance for secret, restricted, confidential? I mean, that's a big question. And you have to, make it equal. It's a kind of cost-benefit, because it's very costly if you have, too many places where the secret information can be distributed. It's basically not about the personal clearance, but it's about the clearance of the venues and the transport of information and things like that. It's very costly. And so, how you decide what kind of level of classification you need could be arbitrary. Another weakness is if the clearance is removed from the person can lose a job. Because if you are sitting on a place where you are required to have a clearance, once you're taken off the clearance, you're off the job. You're suspended from the job. That's happened, for example, very recently. We had a high-level official from the Defense Ministry who became the auditor in NATO Audit Office, getting the highest clearances you can imagine, in NATO. But suddenly, there's been a case at the Czech court which led our national security agencies to withdraw his security clearance. So it means this guy, who was one of the most successful Czechs in Brussels, sitting in a very important job, suddenly was out of job. This is a weakness. Of course, imagine somebody fabricates a case against a person, you lose your clearance. Of course, it takes time. You explain that it was wrong and it was false, but the damage has been done already. So that's a weakness of the system. You have to have some barriers against this kind of arbitrary attack. Because anyone who would like to get rid of certain person who is going after, his interest, can do a case in the press and cause that a person will lose the clearance, and then it's a big problem. Now, last point is related to the Control Commission. According to the law, some functions have access to classified information without clearance and briefing, just as a matter of their position. It's the president of the country, but also all deputies and senators of the parliament, and members of the government, and some other judges. Of course, it's a weak point. Nobody made a kind of procedure on them, because it is considered unconstitutional that a kind of executive body will actually make inquiry on elected officials. Well, in the United States, it's different. Before you get appointed, you need a clearance. And it takes sometimes, 2 years. In some positions, they're waiting to get a clearance for a person to be nominated. So I'm saying openly, this is maybe a weakness of our system, because we don't do it in American way. Final slide. If there will be interest in knowing how this system of security clearances procedures, this is for the government to government to talk. It's not me working outside of the government now to be a mediator of this information. I know the embassy has been suggesting this to your National Security Council and to SBU. if interest be, I know that the guys in Prague are ready to share the information, the insiders who are working in this. There is a reference to the legislation, so you can find the law in English, and you can study the law how it's in English. Now, as for the other elements, I will leave the slides here, so don't worry. You can get the copy of my presentation. For NGO sector and activists, Otevřená společnost, which is an open society, is an NGO. It's not the Soros NGO. It's just another one. Michal Tošovský was with us from this NGO in December roundtable. They have a large amount of information about using the Freedom of Information Act in security field. They have a program which is referred to there, Police as Public Service. We are partner of the police on the way to the trust of citizens. I think this should be of particular interest here in Ukraine. I know that here you have the program Je to moja policia, this is my police, and I think in helping to increase the prestige and credibility of the security forces and police, the NGOs are, and I know here are, active NGOs capable of using this. You need the cooperation of both. So application of access to the information in increasing the trust in what police is doing, I think it's one of the lessons we can share. My final point is not all of our lessons are good or successful, but maybe it should be even more appealing to you to learn from unsuccessful lessons, not to follow the path of them.